Will Donald Trump finally get the Nobel Peace Prize he has been so unfairly denied for so long? Emily.
Yes, he will be denied the Nobel Peace Prize continually.
He'll be denied.
Stranger things have happened in the world, but I don't think this is going to be the thing that changes the world's mind about Donald Trump.
I guess to paraphrase the man himself, nobody knows.
This is Impromptu from Washington Post Opinions, a show that brings you conversations about the news we can't stop thinking about because it changes every 5 minutes. I'm Dana Milbank, and this week we're still talking about Iran. After a week of hemming and hawing, Trump, over the weekend, joined the Israeli attack on Iran and ordered a U.S. bombing of 3 Iranian nuclear sites. Iran retaliated, but in a restrained and choreographed way, launching missiles at a U.S. base in Qatar, but telegraphing the attack in advance. Last night, Trump announced a shaky ceasefire. This morning, as he headed off to the NATO summit, he accused both sides of violating the ceasefire, but particularly Israel, and he was so mad he used what we at Impromptu will refer to only as the F word. By the time you are listening to this podcast, something else may have happened that again changes everything. Heck, we may be bombing Sweden if they still haven't given him the Nobel Prize by close of business today. To help me unpack what has happened, and what may yet be ahead, I'm joined by 2 colleagues who, in sharp contrast to your host, have expertise in the region. Can you please introduce yourselves?
I'm Jason Rezaian. I am the Director of Press Freedom Initiatives here at the Washington Post, formerly a opinions columnist, and before that, our correspondent in Tehran.
I'm Emily Harding. I am the Vice President of the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining me. So last week, Trump was vacillating between belligerence and diplomacy. He was a human magic 8-ball, offering a different answer each time he was asked. 2 days after saying he wanted to give diplomacy a chance, he launched the attack on Saturday night, Washington time. Now that we may or may not have a ceasefire, and this all may or may not go down as the 12-day war, as Trump wants to call it, would you call the U.S. military intervention a success? Let's talk about the big picture.
It's too early to tell whether this is a success. On the one hand, it seems like it was successful in that we lost no American pilots. We lost no lives on the ground in Qatar. However, I think it will take a little while to figure out if we really accomplished the main goal, and that was the destruction of Iran's nuclear program. There are sort of 2 options here. Option 1 is that the nuclear program was destroyed or at least set back for 2 to 5 years. Option 2 is that it was only partially destroyed, and Iran has enough remnants of a program, and of course the continuing knowledge about how to build a nuclear weapon, that they could sprint towards a bomb the minute that they have the space and the opportunity to do that. That is the worst case scenario. That cannot happen.
I think there's other bad case scenarios, including the pressure that inevitably befalls the Iranian people in situations like this. Anytime Iran or any authoritarian state is attacked from abroad, the real response is against their own folks in the country. Just this morning, as we're taping, Iranian parliament is planning to change the laws around what they consider espionage to make it much more sweeping. As someone who was falsely accused and imprisoned for a very long time on espionage charges, I know that their interpretation of espionage was already very vast, and it's going to get bigger. And so I think I was opposed to any kind of regime change type operation in Iran, always have been. Don't think that it succeeded in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places where we've tried to bomb people into submission. Didn't think it would work this time. But if there is a ceasefire that holds, and even if it does curtail Iran's nuclear ambitions, it's going to put the sort of hope for any meaningful change very much on a much longer time scale for the Iranian people.
So it actually, even if it succeeds in its primary mission, it could wind up harming, obviously, Iranians at home.
Well, I think we've had this myopic approach to Iran through the nuclear and ballistic missile lens for a very long time at the expense of a more traditional American value, which is democracy.
All right. So Iran, after its limited response to the U.S. strike, reportedly sent word that it was ready for a ceasefire. Is this the unconditional surrender Trump was looking for? Or is it something less than that?
It's definitely something less than that. Ceasefire is just a ceasefire, and somehow it doesn't seem like there's a lot of meat on the bones of what the ceasefire will actually look like. Unconditional surrender would have looked like immediately submitting to inspections by the IAEA or some other kind of international body to go in and see if the nuclear program was in fact destroyed. Unconditional surrender is not a ceasefire in 12 hours, it's a ceasefire right now, and then a total shutdown of any military activity. That's not what this is, but it is a first step. To me, the ceasefire suggests that Israel is at least mostly through their target deck. And it suggests that Iran basically does not want to put up with any more damage and is trying to hold on to whatever regime stability it can.
Mm-hmm.
And also, Iran doesn't have defenses that could stand up to any more of an Israeli or American onslaught. So I don't think that they have a lot of choices here. But if they had credible air defense and, a larger supply of missiles, I think it's unlikely that they would have accepted even a short-term conditional ceasefire.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with that. Israel did a magnificent job demolishing the air defense network and seems to have pretty substantially impacted their missile forces.
Yeah.
And you guys started talking about this a moment ago, but, obviously the ceasefire it's silent on the nuclear question. Is there any chance Iran will be in a mood to negotiate on the program now? Will it just drive it even further underground so we don't know what's going on? And I assume, Emily, you laid out what the possibilities are. Does anybody really have any idea of what kind of damage was done?
I'm suspecting that the intelligence community knows something of what was done. Actually, the folks who do imagery analysis are wizards. They can pull a picture that looks like a bunch of gray specks to a normal human, and they can say, well, this is what this is, and this is what this is. So they'll be able to tell some things. There's a wide variety of overhead pictures that can come out of this, and you can get some indication. I also assume that various intelligence agencies are trying to figure out what's going on inside the regime debates, and that, I think, is where the action is right now. Iran is not a monolith, even though the supreme leader is in fact in charge. There will be a robust internal debate about what to do now. We saw this back in 2003, 2004, where Iran decided to pause its nuclear program and enter into negotiations after the U.S. invasion of Iraq and after Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program in Libya. So I think they will have an internal policy process of sorts with their somewhat gutted leadership chain to talk through, what do we do now? Do we negotiate? Do we shut everybody out? Do we take the ceasefire for a couple weeks and try to rebuild? What do we do?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to remember that the supreme leader is 86 years old, has to be sitting wherever he is in Iran thinking to himself, the only reason I'm still alive is because Israel hasn't decided to kill me yet. And I think that probably factors into his own personal calculations. And then also the calculations, if he is indeed killed, whatever the succession plan looks like and who those people are, which factions they belong to within the system. We already have heard, since the beginning of Israel's strikes a couple of weeks ago, people in the parliament and others in the Revolutionary Guard Corps saying, we need to weaponize as quickly as possible. That's not something that you could have said out loud as a member of the regime 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. And so that is a changing dynamic. Same time, many of the people who were involved with negotiating the Iran nuclear deal are still in influential positions, maybe not deciding positions in the system, including Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who was Deputy Foreign Minister and one of the lead nuclear negotiators. And all of my reporting and communication indicates that he still wants to talk.
Now, last week, Jason, we talked about how the Israeli strikes made Iran look like, something of a paper tiger. Even now, after this sort of beating, what potential damage could it do to the United States, to Israel, to the region, to shipping and oil? Like what, terrorism, what kind of cards do they still have?
I mean, I think that the one that we hear the most about is creating impassable traffic in the Straits of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil supply has to pass through. That would do a lot of damage to themselves as well. And I've always thought that's more bluster than anything else. Mm-hmm. They can do real damage, but not on the same scale that Israel and the United States can. Iran has always excelled at, what we call non-conventional or asymmetrical tactics. right? Roadside bombs where American forces are, targeted assassinations, extraterritorial assassinations in Western capitals, hostage taking, something I know, unfortunately too much about. Yeah. So, they have ways of hurting us, but not in that same kind of existential way that we objectively have to hurt them.
Emily, is there an Iranian sleeper cell on my corner?
Maybe, unlikely. So if you look at the elements of their state power, you've got oil, you've got the proxy network, and you've got missile forces. Missile forces have been, it seems, largely demolished. The proxy forces are severely weakened after the last year. Hezbollah is a shadow of its former self. The Houthis are somewhat weakened. They at least signed a deal with the U.S. as far as like getting traffic in and out of the Red Sea. And then there's oil, which Jason already mentioned. With any of these, he's absolutely right. They can't do as much damage as we, the Israelis, the West, big picture, can do to them. And that cost-benefit trade-off just really isn't worth it for them right now. They will say things like, we will respond in a way we choose at a time we choose in the future. They've made those threats before. They've been trying to kill Donald Trump for years. They'll probably continue that bluster, continue to say these things. Whether they have the actual will to execute on it, and if they do have the will, whether the capability will endure is a bigger question. I would never underestimate them, that's to be sure, but it just seems like a losing proposition for them right now.
Okay. All right, much more to discuss, including our domestic politics on the issue, but first we have to take a quick break. Welcome back. I'm Dana Milbank, and this is Impromptu. So Trump, after said hemming and hawing, made the decision to bomb Iran. Democrats introduced a war powers resolution in the House. The Tucker Carlson wing of the MAGA movement was noisy and angry about the idea of attacking Iran. Do you think there will be any domestic political fallout from the attack, or is that kind of an irrelevant consideration now if it turns out the hostilities really are over?
So this is one of those moments where Trump took a huge gamble, and it might politically pay off. It might really backfire. It's all going to depend on what happens in the next couple of weeks and whether Iran did, in fact, preserve enough of a capability to race to a bomb. I think that if that eventuality happens, it's bad news for the world, but it's also going to be really bad news for Trump and for the Republicans who aligned themselves with him because the gamble didn't work. On the other hand, if it works out, and so far things are pretty much playing to script, it can look like this was deftly played. Like Trump pulled off an attack on the Iranian nuclear program, did more damage to it than multiple presidents have before him, and that it kind of worked. So will that get him the Nobel Peace Prize? No. However, it may get him a little bit of credibility where he badly needed it.
So I understand what could go wrong in the long term, but what could still go wrong in the next couple of weeks?
Well, the war powers discussion is an interesting one. I kind of am betting that most of the American public doesn't care so much about the esoteric legal arguments, whether this was legal or not. Honestly, I think that a lot of people who align themselves with Trump are going to say, look, America is strong, America is back. What was it that Trump said like a week ago, that we were America's hot as a pistol right now, and before he was in office, it was cold as ice. So I think he's going to point to it as a reinvigoration of the American spirit.
I want to add one thing. As someone who likes sort of the pluralistic discussion around politics that we have in America, it's nice to see avowed MAGA people disagreeing on something in really public ways. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good thing. And I'd love to see more of that.
Well, don't get your hopes up too high there, Mr. Rezaian.
Well, for a long time, Iran was really sort of the easiest win. If you wanted to beat up on Iran, it was a kind of a nonpartisan thing. Everybody wanted to be tough on Iran. And to see a little bit of nuance in that discussion and see whack jobs like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson get themselves all worked up in ways that I kind of agreed with, sort of thrilling.
I would never say it's thrilling when I find myself on the same side as Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I'll go with intriguing. All right. So some hawks, both in Israel and the United States, argue that there can be no lasting peace, no real lasting settlement here without regime change in Iran. Trump himself seem to be pushing for regime change for a few minutes before going for the ceasefire. Do you think that's right?
So I'm looking forward to hearing Jason's thoughts on this for sure.
Yeah, when you said regime change, I thought maybe you meant in the prime ministership of Israel, not Iran.
I'm pushing for regime change here at home, but that's another matter.
Exactly. We're talking about three different places. Look, I think Benjamin Netanyahu, going back at least a quarter century, has made it really clear that he's trying to get rid of the regime in Tehran. And I don't think that he is happy about slowing down this fight at all. That's just me. I don't know the man, but, there's a long public record of him saying just that. I also think that, the idea that the Islamic Republic, even a hollowed out version of it, is going to shift its ideological position of acrimony towards the United States and Israel, impossible. It's not something they could do on a dime.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at history, there's not a lot of great examples of outside attacks leading to revolutions. The couple exceptions are Russia, 1917, Egypt, sort of, 1948 war and the 1952 changeover, but there are a lot of things about both of those that are very different than this situation. I've had lots of conversations over the years with the Israelis about this. And yes, of course, the long-term ambition here has been a change in regime in Iran. And when they say regime change, they don't mean just the people at the top leaving. They mean a complete shift in the foreign policy of Iran. And they think that's only possible if there's a new system in place. But external regime change just isn't going to work. This is a real robust country with a bright and fervent group of citizens. They are politically savvy. They know where they want to go as a country, it seems like, and trying to impose something from the outside just isn't going to work. I would be very much in favor of the Iranian people having more freedom, more ability to do the things that they want to do, to not have the kinds of kidnapping and horrible political repression that Jason's mentioned. But that's something that can't be imposed externally. It's the kind of thing that's going to have to come about because of internal change, internal pressures.
I 100% agree. And I think, for a long time, those of us who've been watching Iran closely have made the point that these sorts of arrangements or agreements to slow down their military dimensions are important, but they can't be done in the vacuum where there's no discussion of supporting Iranian civil society. Even right now, in this context, the internet has been shut down. People can't access information. Satellite television, which a lot of people rely on for information, is being jammed. People are being arrested, as they have been, throughout the 46-year history of this system. So, one of the priorities of the United States should be to support those democratic aspirations that, Iranians have made clear by going out into the streets and protesting, often taking their own lives. Thousands of people have been killed by the Iranian regime over the last 46 years for trying to express themselves. And so I think all of this conversation about, supporting peace in the region and helping Iran, really disingenuous unless that piece of the puzzle is brought into the discussion and brought into it quickly. And this is something I know more about than I'd like. And I know that not living up to those parts of the American promise is something that administrations of both parties has failed to do going back 45 years.
It was interesting to me, by the way, that the Israelis late in the game struck both the Basij, which is one of the internal security forces that Iran has that really is responsible for controlling the population, and also one of the main political prisons in Tehran. It was sort of a side-glancing strike, almost like they were trying to open the front door. That seemed to fit with their aspirations of causing internal unrest and then perhaps leading somehow to a regime change. It seemed like a long shot to me, but it was interesting that Israel included both of those on their target deck.
All right. So I think we can all agree that it's kind of impossible to predict where things are going to go from here. And that's why I'm going to ask you to predict where things are going to go from here. Does the regime crumble, or will the hardliners be empowered? Does the nuclear program continue? Will there be a regional war? Sanctions? Like, let's just do an imaginary scenario, informed by your knowledge of the scene, and what's going to happen in the short and the long term.
So I grew up as an intelligence analyst, and intelligence analysts are instructed never to predict the future. So I'm going to do what I was trained to do, and I'm going to give you our best guess on the straight line way forward, and then talk about what could push that line one direction or the other to various extremes. On the straight line piece, as I said before, it does seem like Iran and the U.S. and Israel, frankly, are very much playing to script. We had the strike on the nuclear program, then we had the hit on Qatar that was telegraphed, no casualties. Supposedly, they dropped the exact same number of missiles on Al Udeid Air Base that we dropped on the nuclear facilities. This is a very clear signal that we want to de-escalate. We want this to be over. The ceasefire may or may not hold. Let's assume for a minute that it does. Then what happens next is a fight to try to get into Iran and to try to have a sustainable end to the nuclear program and some kind of assurances that they're not rebuilding their proxy networks. So the most likely way forward is that you have the Israelis continuing to keep an eye on any kind of rearming of proxy networks, rebuilding of a nuclear program, and any kind of appearance that the missile fleet is being rebuilt. They will tell you that they think this is just another battle in a 100-year war, and so they expect they're going to have another battle and another battle and another battle. So they're going to be looking for signs of that. Meanwhile, Trump is going to want this to be fixed. The last time that I was in Israel and talking to them about this, I was talking about permanent kind of ends to this sort of hostilities. And it was almost like they were verbally patting me on the head and saying, you Americans, you're so cute. You always want to fix things. Some things just can't be fixed. That, I think, is the straight line. What could push it one way or another is either Iran decides this is an existential crisis and they want to go all in on a sprint to a bomb, or they want to go all in on shutting out the international community and trying to rebuild as fast as they can. Then I think Israel and the U.S. have hard decisions to make. On the other side, you could have Khomeini decide that maybe it is time for an actual negotiated solution. You could have the really extreme scenario where there's an internal coup of some sort. He gets pushed out of the way. Somebody comes to power who's either vastly more hawkish or vastly more dovish and decides to actually go forth with a real negotiation and try and calm things down, focus on internal stability, focus on economic prosperity. Clearly, that's the best case scenario. The Middle East does not specialize in best case scenarios.
No.
It's much more rambunctious and chaotic than that. So I think that's a way of saying there's a lot of factors at play here. It's an extraordinary complex environment. We'll keep an eye on it.
Now, Jason, journalists are a little more flexible on forecasts than intelligence analysts. We go out on a limb and make predictions, counting on everybody to have forgotten them by the time they are proven wrong. So let's hear it.
Nostradamus over here. I think that it's hard for me to envision a full negotiated settlement that is centered around Iran's nuclear program that both Benjamin Netanyahu and Ali Khamenei will agree on. And so I think that calm will be short-lived. I don't expect Israeli assassinations of Iranian officials to magically stop. They've been doing it for over 15 years. And the upper echelons of Iran's system have been pretty hollowed out. So yeah, I don't see any kind of grand shifts in this while Khamenei is still alive. I think after that, all bets are kind of off.
Can we at least say that the notion of a protracted regional war that some people were talking about just a few days ago is not on the table?
I don't want to say it's not on the table, but I think it feels a lot less likely than it did a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the interests of all the parties here are pretty much in alignment towards that not happening. The Gulfies don't want any part of this. They would like for Iran to retreat back into its box. The Israelis don't want a wider regional war. I think they still hold out hope that while President Trump is in office, that you could even restart the Abraham Accords and reach some kind of agreement between Israel and the Gulf states. So it doesn't seem like it's in their interests at the moment. Something really weird would have to happen to spark that.
All right. Well, there's a tiny bit of good news to go home with. And with that, we've got to wrap this up. Thank you both for joining Impromptu and for making me smarter.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dana.
This episode was produced by Hadley Robinson and Regina DeHeer, edited by Damir Marusic, and mixed by Emma Munger. Special thanks to Millie Mitra and Deirdre Byrne. Thanks for listening to Impromptu. Please let us know what you think about this ceasefire. Send an email to impromptu@washpost.com.